What happened when a fragile young boy, protected by a transparent medical bubble, stood face to face with one of Britain's most disciplined royal guards? What unfolded in front of Buckingham Palace that afternoon was so extraordinary that the crowd fell silent, cameras lowered, and centuries of tradition collided with an act of pure humanity. Stay with us until the end to witness this remarkable story of honor and compassion. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that reveal the heart behind the world's strongest traditions. It was one of those radiant summer afternoons when Buckingham Palace shimmered under the golden light of London's sky. Tourists lined the great gates in thick clusters, their phones raised, snapping away at the soldiers in scarlet tunics and tall black bearskin hats. The royal guards, as always, stood in flawless formation, their rifles gleaming, their posture rigid, their faces unreadable. These men were not simply ornaments of tradition. They were living symbols of discipline and guardians of centuries of duty. Among them that day was Sergeant James Whittaker, a 34-year-old veteran who had spent over a decade serving the crown. His path to the uniform had been marked by both sacrifice and valor. 2 tours in Afghanistan had shaped him, instilling a level of focus and control that made him stand apart. While some saw the guards as little more than tourist attractions, James carried each moment on duty with deep reverence. To him, every crease in his uniform, every second of stillness, was not just performance but a continuation of heritage. From dawn, he had prepared as though stepping into a sacred role. Boots shined to a mirror polish, brass buttons gleaming, his ceremonial rifle strapped across his chest. By 2 p.m., he was at his post, body unmoving though the sun bore down heavily. Tourists jeered, joked, or tested his composure as they often did, but James's discipline never faltered. For him, ignoring distractions was second nature. He was prepared for provocation, prepared for disrespect, prepared for anything except what was about to arrive. Far down the palace approach, a family began making their way slowly through the crowd. At first, no one noticed them. They looked like ordinary visitors, a father with a camera bag over his shoulder, a mother clutching a handbag tightly, her movements deliberate. Between them, however, was a sight that pulled attention like a magnet. A boy, no older than 8, was encased within a clear protective bubble. The dome-like structure, resting on a lightweight wheelchair base, shielded him from the outside world. The child's condition was evident. His frail frame, his pale skin, the surgical mask covering his face inside the bubble. His parents maneuvered the chair carefully, clearing space as they approached the gates. The chatter of tourists softened as more eyes turned toward the boy. People stepped back, forming a path almost instinctively, as if recognizing this moment required quiet respect. The boy himself, however, did not look fragile in spirit. His wide eyes sparkled with curiosity, his tiny hand pressed against the inside of the bubble as he gazed at the guards. His smile carried the pure wonder of a child seeing his heroes up close for the first time. For months, maybe years, his family had kept him safe indoors, away from infections that could threaten his life. And yet, here he was, in front of Buckingham Palace, staring at the soldiers he had dreamed about. The guard he fixated on was James Whittaker. To the boy, the sergeant looked like a figure carved out of history, a living statue in brilliant red. The crowd sensed the weight of the encounter. Phones slowly lowered. Conversations hushed. Even the tourists who had once tried to provoke laughter from the guards now stood still, waiting to see what might unfold. James, from behind his stoic mask, noticed everything. He saw the way the parents guided the boy's chair gently into view. He recognized the careful protection of the bubble and understood, without words, what it meant. This was not a prankster, nor a disrespectful tourist, nor another fleeting distraction. This was a child, fighting against fragility, seeking a memory that might last a lifetime. For 8 years, James had trained himself to suppress instinct, to resist reacting to anything but direct threats. Yet in that moment he felt something stir within him. Behind his rigid posture, behind the uniform and the discipline, was a soldier who understood sacrifice, a man who had seen life's fragility on foreign battlefields. His face remained still, but his heart was not untouched. The boy raised a small device inside his bubble, a phone fitted to a stabilizer, clearly prepared for this very moment. He held it up awkwardly, his hands trembling from effort, angling the lens toward the guard. The crowd inhaled collectively, the suspense palpable. Everyone knew the rules. Guards did not break their stance, did not smile, did not pose for photos. Would James remain stone-faced, allowing the child to take his picture from a distance, or would something greater overcome the weight of tradition? The seconds stretched long. The guard's expression remained unreadable, yet his chest rose slightly, as though wrestling with the invisible pull between duty and compassion. The tourists could sense the choice forming before their eyes. One child's wish had collided with centuries of protocol, and the entire palace courtyard seemed to hold its breath. What happened next would not only astonish the boy and his family, but would ripple far beyond the palace gates, reminding the world that even the strongest traditions find their true strength in humanity. The boy's story did not begin that afternoon at Buckingham Palace. It began years earlier, in a quiet hospital room, where doctors first explained the gravity of his condition. Born with a rare immune deficiency, his body lacked the natural defenses most children take for granted. A simple cold could spiral into something life-threatening, and infections that were harmless to others could put him in critical danger. For his parents, everyday life became a delicate balance between hope and fear, freedom and protection. While other children ran through playgrounds and scraped their knees, their son's world was defined by hospital visits, air filters, medications, and protective masks. His home became a carefully controlled environment, every surface sanitized, every visitor screened. To strangers, his clear bubble might have looked unusual or even strange, but to his family, it was a lifeline, his fragile shield against a world full of invisible threats. Yet despite all the challenges, the boy's spirit remained unbroken. He was curious, endlessly fascinated by the outside world. Books, videos, and pictures became his windows into the life he could not fully experience. Among his favorite subjects were the royal guards of Britain. Perhaps it was their bold red uniforms or the imposing bearskin hats. Perhaps it was the way they stood unshaken, as though nothing could move them. To him, they were more than soldiers. They were symbols of strength, courage, and stability in a life that felt uncertain. His parents knew of this fascination. On nights when his energy allowed, he would sit in bed and watch videos of the changing of the guard, mimicking the way they marched in unison. Sometimes, he even practiced standing at attention in front of his bubble's mirrored wall, pretending he too wore the scarlet tunic and polished boots. His parents would clap, and he would grin, knowing that in his imagination, he stood among the world's bravest men. The dream of seeing the royal guards in person had lived within him for years. But for a long time, it seemed impossible. Travel meant risk. Crowds meant exposure. For a child who had spent much of his life behind protective layers, the idea of standing among hundreds of tourists outside Buckingham Palace was almost unimaginable. Yet after long discussions with doctors, and with every precaution carefully prepared, his parents decided to grant him this wish. They knew it carried risks, but they also knew it carried something more important, the chance for their son to feel alive, to touch the dream he had carried so long. And so, that summer day, with his bubble carefully sealed, medical supplies packed, and every detail meticulously planned, the family made their way into the heart of London. The city was bustling with energy, its streets alive with tourists, double-decker buses, and the distant chime of Big Ben. But for the boy, it all faded in comparison to the destination that awaited him, the gates of Buckingham Palace. When they arrived, his eyes widened in awe. The towering iron gates glistened in the sun, adorned with golden details. The palace itself stood like a fortress of history, its windows gazing down upon centuries of change. The boy pressed his small hand to the bubble, as though trying to touch the grandeur before him. His parents exchanged a glance. This was the moment they had hoped for. As they approached, the crowd began to notice. Parents whispered to their children, explaining quietly why the boy was inside his transparent dome. Strangers stepped aside, creating space for the wheelchair to roll forward. The hum of chatter softened into silence. What had begun as a simple tourist gathering was shifting into something more profound. The boy looked up at the guards standing in perfect formation. His heart pounded with excitement and his smile radiated pure joy. These were the figures he had admired for so long, and now they stood only a few feet away. Among them, Sergeant James Whittaker's steady presence caught his attention. There was something about his stance, unwavering yet dignified, that drew the boy in. He raised his phone slowly, his tiny hands trembling with effort inside the bubble. The crowd watched intently. For most visitors, taking a photo with the guards was just another memory among dozens of vacation pictures. But for this boy, it was different. It was not just a photo. It was proof that he had lived a dream, that he had stood in front of those he considered heroes and captured the moment forever. James saw the gesture out of the corner of his eye. He had witnessed countless tourists raising cameras, posing and mocking, but this was different. Behind the glass barrier, he saw not just a boy, but a fighter. He recognized the resilience in those bright eyes, the kind of resilience that soldiers knew well. And though his training demanded he remain motionless, inside he felt the heavy pull of compassion. The air thickened with anticipation. The boy adjusted his phone, his parents leaning in, guiding him carefully. The tourists surrounding them remained hushed, almost reverent, as if they too understood the weight of this moment. The boy pressed the button, but his angle was clumsy. The guard's towering frame didn't quite fit within the lens. He adjusted again, but the photo was awkward. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People could feel his struggle, and their hearts silently willed the guard to respond. Tradition said he would not move. Protocol said he could not react, but humanity whispered something different. Inside his stoic silence, James's mind replayed the years of training that had drilled immobility into his very muscles. He recalled moments of standing under pouring rain in searing heat, even as tourists mocked him inches from his face. Yet nothing in his training had prepared him for the sight of a child in a bubble, determined to capture his dream. As the boy struggled with the angle again, the guard felt the battle between duty and compassion intensify. His face gave nothing away, but inside, he knew a decision was coming. And it was a decision that could turn an ordinary afternoon at Buckingham Palace into a moment the world would never forget. The boy steadied his phone inside the bubble, his small hands trembling as he tried again to frame the photo. His parents encouraged him softly, their voices muffled to the crowd but clear enough to reach his ears. The tourists nearby leaned in, not to interfere, but to witness. It was as if everyone had silently agreed that this moment belonged not to them, not to the palace, but to the child who had come so far just to stand here. Sergeant James Whittaker remained motionless, his posture flawless, his expression unchanging. To the casual observer, he was still the perfect embodiment of discipline. Yet behind his stoic gaze, a storm of thought and emotion was raging. He remembered the endless hours of drill, the countless reminders from his superiors. The guards must never break formation, never yield to distraction, never let their humanity show while on duty. They were symbols of the monarchy, of strength, of unwavering presence. But as he watched the boy in the bubble struggling, his heart reminded him that symbols alone were not enough. The boy angled his phone once more, straining to get the guard in frame. His arms ached, his breathing grew uneven, but his determination did not falter. This was not just about capturing a picture. This was about proving to himself that even in a body weakened by illness, he could live a dream. His smile was faint but persistent, fueled by courage greater than his years. James's eyes flicked to the parents. The father's hand rested firmly on the wheelchair handle, steady but tense, while the mother clasped her hands in front of her chest, as though in prayer. Their faces revealed what their son could not see, the depth of their hope, the quiet plea that somehow this moment would not end in disappointment. The silence of the crowd was almost reverent. Even the usual chatter of tourists had faded. No one shouted, no one jeered, no one mocked. All eyes were locked on the fragile boy in the bubble and the soldier who represented centuries of unshaken protocol. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, and time itself slowed. And then, in a movement so subtle it might have gone unnoticed to the untrained eye, Sergeant Whitaker shifted. His right boot pressed down firmly on the stone, pivoting his body just a fraction to the side. His rifle, gleaming in the sunlight, lowered ever so slightly. The gesture was small, no more than a step or two, but in the world of the Royal Guards, it was monumental. The boy gasped, his eyes widening. His tiny mouth curved into the brightest smile his parents had ever seen. In that instant, he knew the guard had done it for him. The phone steadied in his hands, and with one careful tap the screen flashed. The picture was taken. The crowd erupted, not in loud cheers of mockery or defiance, but in a wave of gentle applause and heartfelt emotion. Some clapped quietly, others wiped tears from their eyes, and still others simply stood in silence, overwhelmed by the beauty of what they had witnessed. A rare and unspoken bond had formed between a soldier bound by duty and a child bound by fragility, and it was something no camera could ever fully capture. Inside his bubble, the boy beamed, pressing his phone against the glass to show his parents the photo. His face and the towering guard side by side, a moment immortalized. The mother's tears spilled freely now, her hand trembling as she touched the bubble. The father lowered his head, overcome by gratitude and relief. They had taken risks to bring their son here, but in this moment, every risk had been worth it. James returned to his rigid stance, his rifle lifting once more into perfect position, his body locking back into place. His face betrayed nothing, yet his heart carried the quiet satisfaction of having granted a boy's dream. He had not spoken. He had not broken the silence of tradition, but his small act of compassion had spoken louder than words ever could. Tourists rushed to capture the scene, not out of disrespect, but to preserve what they instinctively knew was history in the making. Dozens of videos began circulating within minutes. Onlookers whispered to one another, "Did you see that?" He moved for the boy. Strangers exchanged glances of understanding, united in the knowledge that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The boy, meanwhile, was not thinking of viral videos or headlines. He was simply lost in the joy of the moment. For once, his illness did not define him. For once, he was not the boy in the bubble, but the boy who had stood proudly beside a royal guard. That image, frozen in his phone and in his heart, was proof that dreams could be real. Even for those who lived with limits, others could not imagine. As the family slowly began to withdraw, the crowd parted once again, making way for them with the same quiet reverence they had shown before. Some offered nods of respect, others whispered words of encouragement. The boy lifted his phone toward them, showing his photo proudly, and even strangers smiled back with tears in their eyes. Behind them, Sergeant Whitaker remained at his post, unmoving once more, as though nothing had happened. Yet those who had witnessed knew the truth. Something had happened. Something unforgettable. A centuries-old tradition had bent, not broken, to allow humanity to shine through. And in that bending, it had revealed a strength far greater than unyielding rules could ever show. For the boy and his family, the moment was more than just a picture. It was a memory that would carry them through hospital stays, treatments, and long nights of uncertainty. It was a reminder that even in a life marked by fragility, beauty and courage could still flourish. For James, the soldier in scarlet, it was a moment he would never speak of, but never forget. And for the world that would soon see the videos online, it was a lesson. Tradition and compassion are not enemies. They are partners in the creation of meaning. The family's car rolled away from the palace gates, the boy still clutching his phone inside the bubble. His laughter filled the small space, a rare sound that his parents would replay in their minds long after this day. For the first time in months, his face was radiant, not from screens or medication, but from the triumph of a dream fulfilled. He looked down at the photo again and again, tracing the outline of the guard beside him with his finger. To him, it wasn't just a picture. It was proof that he mattered, proof that the world had made space for him even in the strictest of traditions. Back at Buckingham Palace, Sergeant James Whitaker resumed his silent vigil. But he knew the moment would not remain secret. The crowd outside buzzed with conversation, tourists whispering excitedly about what they had seen. Phones vibrated with notifications as videos began uploading to social media. Within hours, the story had spread beyond the gates. carried on the digital tide of curiosity and admiration. Clips of the boy raising his phone, of James subtly shifting, and of the crowd's emotional reaction went viral almost instantly. Headlines appeared. Royal Guard breaks protocol for child in bubble. Moment of humanity at Buckingham Palace. A picture worth more than tradition. Millions of viewers across the world paused their routines to watch a simple act of kindness unfold. Some were struck by the soldier's compassion, others by the boy's courage, but all were united in the sense that something profoundly human had happened. Comment sections flooded with emotion. Parents of children with disabilities shared their tears, saying they understood the weight of that photograph. Veterans wrote about how rules and discipline are important, but true honor sometimes lies in knowing when to bend them. Strangers, thousands of miles away, admitted they had never thought about the humanity behind the soldiers in scarlet, but now they would never forget. News anchors debated whether the Guard had truly broken protocol. Some said the moment showed weakness. Others argued it showed strength in its purest form. But beyond the chatter of opinion, the public had already decided. The boy's smile was undeniable, and the Guard's compassion unmistakable. Tradition had not been diminished, it had been elevated, proving that even the most stoic roles carried beating hearts beneath the surface. For the boy's parents, the overwhelming response was both humbling and comforting. In interviews, they spoke softly about their son's struggles, about the countless hospital visits and the risks of infection that defined their lives. They explained that the protective bubble was not a symbol of pity but of survival. Yet on that day, survival had made space for joy. They said the Guard's gesture had given their son a memory that no illness could take away. As the story grew, letters poured into the palace from around the world. Teachers used the moment in classrooms to talk about compassion and respect. Churches and community groups shared the story as an example of humanity transcending barriers. Even soldiers in other countries, bound by their own traditions, shared it with pride, understanding that the boy and the Guard had created a universal language: kindness. Sergeant Whitaker himself never spoke publicly about what had happened. He remained silent, as all Guards are trained to be, letting others carry the story forward. But within the regiment, word spread quickly. Some younger Guards whispered about his courage, while older veterans simply nodded, recognizing the wisdom of the act. They knew that discipline meant little without heart. In the months that followed, the photo of the boy in the bubble beside the towering Royal Guard became iconic. It appeared in newspapers, on magazine covers, and in digital galleries dedicated to moments that moved the world. But beyond the fame, the most important place it lived was in the boy's own room, framed beside his bed. On hard nights, when the hum of medical machines filled the air, he would look at that photo and smile, reminding himself that even in his fragile state, he had stood tall beside a symbol of strength. The legacy of that day was not about one soldier, nor about one child. It was about the reminder that tradition and compassion are not enemies, that strength is not always about rigid endurance, but about recognizing the humanity in front of you. The Guard had not abandoned his duty. He had fulfilled it in a way that no manual could ever teach. And the boy had not just taken a picture. He had etched a moment of hope into the hearts of millions. As the years passed, the photo continued to resurface whenever people needed a reminder of humanity in uniform. Some saw it as a story about the monarchy, others as a lesson in kindness, and still others as a quiet miracle. Whatever the interpretation, the truth remained. A Royal Guard had allowed himself to be human, and in doing so, had shown the world what honor truly means. And so, as the mist settles again on the palace grounds and the Guards resume their eternal vigil, that single act lives on, not in rulebooks, not in ceremonies, but in memory. A child's courage, a soldier's compassion, and a crowd's silent awe combined to create a story that no one who witnessed will ever forget. What do you think? Should tradition always remain unbroken? Or should moments of humanity make room within even the strictest duties? Have you ever seen a small act of kindness leave a lasting impact? Share your thoughts below. We read every comment. And if this story touched you, hit the like button. Subscribe for more stories of honor and humanity, and join us as we continue to explore the moments where duty and compassion meet.